This is Tim.
And this is Kumar.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics, sponsored by ComicsNow.com. I am in Tokyo, and Kumar is with me. He's in Melbourne. And today we're going to talk about the Essential Howard the Duck Volume 1. There's no Volume 2, and as far as I know, there aren't any in the works. But this is a very thick book. I can't tell you how many pages it has because there aren't any page numbers.
I made a note. That's one of my notes. No page numbers.
Yeah, it was
annoying.
That's because I was going to say, okay, well, I'm going to read X number of pages a day, but then it was like, well, then I'm going to have to count all the pages.
Yeah, no.
It was going to take up too much time out of too much reading time away from, to just keep track how many pages I'd read. Anyway, but this collects pretty much all of the Steve Gerber written Howard the Duck.
That's right.
Outside of the Max miniseries from the early 2000s.
There was. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which I actually that Max was really the first Howard the Duck that I read.
Oh right.
I've got it in my closet here somewhere.
I haven't read it.
It was not bad. It was. Of course, it was Max, so there was some pretty uncomics codey stuff in it.
Okay.
But I was, you suggested this and I picked it up, and I had not, I'd kind of forgotten or not been aware that there was this much code-approved Howard the Duck. Because all I remembered was the black and white magazine that came out after this.
Oh, right. Yeah, that was and there was also the newspaper strip. Mm-hmm. Which was even tamer than the.
Yeah, it would have to be.
Yeah, it was super tame.
Although I was kind of surprised at how much he got away with within the comics code.
Did you find it was racy?
Well, I mean, for the 1970s.
Okay.
For 1970s comics approved or code approved books, it was a little. I mean, there's some hinted at sex. There are people, dying and committing suicide, on occasion.
Yeah.
So, it's not front and center. Of course, it's all kind of off stage a lot of the time. But still,
right.
I mean, it didn't fit in with my memories of reading Spider-Man in the 70s.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, so. This is all written by Steve Gerber. It's credited to Steve Gerber, Frank Brenner, Gene Colan, and friends. A lot of other artists involved. Some Klaus Janson inks on some of the issues.
Yeah, and I think Infantino penciled one issue, and Val Majeric, is that how you say his name?
Oh yeah, issue 21.
Penciled a couple of issues, including the first appearance, some of the Man-Thing stuff. Anyway, it's mostly Gene Colan.
So, it collects some excerpts from Fear number 19 and Man-Thing Volume 1, number 1, and a couple issues of Giant-Size Man-Thing, where I guess it was a backup story, and then the first 27 issues of the series and the annual number 1. So, it's a lot of reading. But, well, where should we start?
Well, either we start with talking about the 70s, or we start with talking about we start talking about the Essentials collections, which we've already touched on with the stupid page numbers. And the other problem with this is the only Essentials Marvel Essential I own. Actually, I did own the first Fantastic Four one. And it just, to me, the superhero comics just don't work in black and white, because DC had a similar program, the Showcase series, and I picked up the first Superman one, and that was kind of the peak. Those to me are the perfect Superman stories, those ones in the 60s, and they were in black and white, and it just sucked some of the life out of it for me. But that said, I guess we'll get to it more when we talk more about the meat of the book. But somehow Gene Colan's art it's really beautiful in black and white, depending on who was inking him. But sometimes it was actually better, because I looked at some of the color issues, and it was kind of it detracted from the beauty of his line work, which was his one strength. I shouldn't say that, but it was a great strength of Gene Colan's work, was the line,
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, I thought the black and white was better, but
I of course I knew that Howard the Duck comics were somewhat humorous. I was surprised to find such a lighthearted Man-Thing story at the beginning of this. I didn't know there was such a thing as a lighthearted Man-Thing story.
I don't know anything about Man-Thing because I was always a Swamp Thing reader.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know what Steve Gerber was doing in there, but suddenly he had, out of nowhere, he had Howard the Duck walk out of a bush, right? Because he needed something to be more ridiculous than this barbarian, or something is the story, how it goes. There was some cross-dimensional thing, and he had this barbarian appear, and then he needed something even crazier, so he had this duck.
Yeah, well, the entire story's not here from that
That's
issue.
Right.
Just some
You've only got a
excerpts.
fraction of it.
So, yeah, it's hard to get the whole picture, but yeah, he just comes in, is brought in by this dimensional portal.
Right.
But yeah, I mean that barbarian brings some of the humor to that story. It's not all Howard.
Yeah. Well, that's the fact that it's humorous is itself interesting, because there really wasn't any humor in DC or Marvel in the 70s that I can tell. They were a humorless bunch who really took themselves really seriously, because that generation of writers was the first generation that had grown up reading comics, reading the comics that they were writing.
Yeah, well, and they were. I remember many of them, on into the early '80s, were still stuck on imitating Stan Lee and all the True Believer stuff.
That's right. They were really stuck on the Lee Kirby or Lee Ditko. Mm-hmm. Really, they couldn't. They were just spinning their wheels.
Yeah.
In the '80s, I don't know what happened. I think it somehow got worse, because they were feeding off of the '70s writers. So they were cannibalizing their own turds that they had eaten, if you know what I mean. Like the 70s writers, the 70s writers ate the 60s. The 70s writers ate the 60s writers and turded them out, and then the 80s writers ate the turd of the 70s writers.
All right, time for
and
the explicit tag.
Right. But they just it got really awful. But anyway, the 70s, those guys took themselves really seriously, and those guys were having serious arguments in the offices about who was better, who was stronger, the Hulk or the Thing, kind of stuff.
That's where those arguments originated, huh?
That's right, from the actual Marvel bullpen. And at the time, DC was also humorless, because they were trying desperately to keep up with Marvel. Because their books were so out to lunch that they were trying to somehow make kind of, I don't know, they were trying to do these. They were trying to recover Batman from the campiness of the 60s, and they were trying to do really serious stuff, and they had forgotten a lot of the stuff in the 60s was pretty humorous for DC, and they in trying to copy Marvel, they removed all the humor. And Stan Lee was a pretty funny writer, and I think a lot of the guys in the 70s didn't really pick up on that.
It's kind of like take it too seriously as like this Bible or something, and
it's like like these superheroes are really, they're really serious and important about them, and Fantastic Four was funny, and Spider-Man was funny when Stan Lee was writing it. I thought
turning the Skrulls into cows.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So as I was reading this, I came up with. There are basically three main sources of humor in Howard the Duck. One is puns, and like playing with the synonyms and or near synonyms. Like a couple that I wrote down here, where the villain, the Beaver, has like a steel pelt. And there's reference to pelting his pelt with something.
Right.
And also someone who is leaping from parapet to parapet peripatetically. Was one of my favorites.
Right. Yeah.
And the ship, the cruise ship that they're on is called the Damned, and so it's the Voyage of the Damned.
Right. Right.
Second source is parodying genre comics. Goofy costume villains and over-the-top dramatic narration, or it's just intentionally ridiculous.
Yes, Star Wars is in there too.
Yes, it was a whole Star Wars parody. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And third, and I mean it's a source of humor, but it's also kind of the serious heart of the book, is Howard as a foreign observer of our society.
That's the key, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was the core of everything.
Mm-hmm.
The humor and every concept in the book itself is Howard being able to look in from outside.
Right, and that's where Gerber's outlet for commentary, his own opinions, I think.
Yeah. Although, I mean, the question is now, reading it now, I don't know what it read like in the 70s, but I'll come back to that point in a second too. But it seems like some of the satire was not as biting as it should have been, and I'm wondering if it's just dated reading it now, or if it was actually if it was powerful in the 70s, or if it was weak, or what. But I did read an interview recently, the 1978 Comics Journal interview, and Gary Groth complains about the satire not being biting enough. So it might have been weak even at the time.
Interesting. But I think, like I said, considering that it was a code-approved book, it was kind of strong. But I mean, for Gary Groth, obviously, it wouldn't be strong enough.
No, but in '78, Gary Groth was still pretty. He was soft-centered. He had a creamy caramel center, and he would still talk about superhero comics and stuff.
I see.
He somehow
completely dismissed all Marvel and DC as trash.
No. Even into the early. See, we're on our first divergence already. I predict there's going to be many, but anyway.
Okay.
But in the early '80s, the Comics Journal up to like '84, '85 had news about like Marvel announces new X Factor series kind of thing, which will feature all of the former X-Men book, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
They used to have news stories about stuff that was coming out from Marvel and DC. But anyway, I found that the satire was not great, but there's like the issue where Howard just walks through the town for the whole issue, and just encounters locals and stuff, and I thought that was excellent.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of stuff I thought was great. I thought the political stuff was a little bit weak, and
well, yeah, the opinions he's trying to get across seem, I'm not sure what the right word is, but a little too cynical, maybe.
Oh, really?
That's that's my take on his opinion.
I think we're talking about two sides of the same coin, because I think he was very cynical, but he was not cynical about the right things, or he was not he was not able to articulate his cynicalness. Like, you could feel how angry Howard was, but his targets were soft targets that had been hit by other people before. Maybe that was part of the problem. I don't know. Anyway.
Okay.
I thought Howard was a great character. I thought Gerber really captured that voice really perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved reading Howard. I just kind of questioned the Star Wars parody and some of the political stuff. It just felt to me like he was, because Gerber was of that generation of writers, and as much as he was very unlike any of those other writers. I'm thinking of like Roy Thomas and whoever else was hanging around Marvel at that time. He was very unlike those guys. He didn't write anything like them, but in a sense he kind of did, because he was he was a bit trapped and felt the need to do, Star Wars parodies or whatever.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, basically, it reminds me of modern books like Fear Agent, in that he really beats the crap out of his characters. He sets up these likable characters and then puts Howard and the others through all kinds of horrible stuff.
Yeah, that was actually, I was kind of surprised that he became separated from those other characters for like 15, 20 issues. Like, that ship is out to sea for like
it's like 6+ months go by while he was waiting for the ship to come back.
Yeah. And at the end of it, I mean, they still haven't resolved this stuff with Dr. Bong. And he showed up at the beginning of that too, like issue 14 or 15, and then issue 27, he still hasn't confronted this villain really, or beaten him or anything. It's interesting because that was the 70s, was when the newsstand distribution was really starting to collapse. And I'm kind of amazed at how long this story arc goes, for more than 20 issues. And I was like, were they able to do this with the newsstand book, which would have irregular distribution? Maybe it caused the newsstand collapse, I don't know. These long-running story arcs because for me, as a kid, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I'd read some comics at the barbershop, and you'd just get a couple of random things. You wouldn't have a full run of 20 issues of Howard the Duck. So there's no way you could really know what was going on. I'll tell you another. Here's a problem. One of the political satire problems, and it's tied into the book coming out in the 70s. Is in issue 21, there's this whole thing with the Sufi, these people who are trying to clean up.
Yeah, it's kind of the religious right.
Right.
Before Reagan.
They're an extreme right-wing censorship group, and at the end of the issue, the leader is unmasked. And Howard's like, "Oh, it's you," and that's it. And we don't get to see who it is.
Well, the hint
apparently
that I was getting, I think I know who he meant for it to be.
Yeah.
Who did you think it was?
I think it's supposed to be Anita Bryant.
Yeah, me too.
But the problem is
about
that
citrus and Florida and that kind of thing.
Right. But it's lost.
Yeah.
It's kind of, that might have made sense that month if you read the issue, but I'm reading it now. It's kind of,
if you don't know who she is, then
If he had made his cynicism more cynical, I think, and been more direct about who this person was, I think we would have something a little bit more effective.
Yeah, well, I doubt if Marvel wanted to do that kind of.
I guarantee.
If he'd been doing this in an indie publisher, we would have shown who it was. But I think being in a mainstream publisher made it have to water it down too much.
Yeah.
The other
thing, and also,
go
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say another thing, again, looping back to all those writers of the 70s that were reading it from the 60s, and Gerber being a part of that, is when this circus of crime shows up. There's like a caption that says, like, it is this circus of crime or whatever, and I'm like, who are these people? I'm supposed to know who they are? Like, I have no idea, but we're already at a stage in the 70s where, as a comic reader, you're supposed to know all the back history of who all the heroes and villains are, so that if they make an appearance, you're supposed to be like, oh, it's them, or whatever.
Yeah, they were in Spider-Man dating back to the Ditko days.
Were they?
Yeah.
See, I don't even remember them.
Really? Oh, yeah.
And I've read the whole Ditko run, but I don't remember the Circus of Crime at all, because they were so not memorable.
Well, yeah, they're no Doc Ock or Green Goblin, but yeah, they're longtime Spider-Man villains.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what surprised me about their appearance was that they became part of the story for like 3 issues, which was, and that, well, I wanted to talk in general about the appearances of other Marvel characters in this series, but
sure.
But yeah, it's like it felt like Gerber didn't handle them the way I expected him to, which was a good thing.
Okay.
They, especially the Circus of Crime, they got kind of more involved in the story than I had expected.
Right.
Often they're kind of like a one-issue, one-and-done thing, because they're not that interesting.
Right.
But he kind of
Right.
made them more interesting than they have been sometimes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And
Well, see, that's something I wasn't sure, because they seem kind of like to have little backstories and personalities to me reading this, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I wonder if they always had that in the other Marvel books.
yeah, not that I've ever read.
Right.
I mean, not that I've read every single appearance of them, but.
Hmm.
And Son of Satan shows up for a few issues, and he makes good use of him too.
I had no idea that was a
Damon Hellstrom,
pre-existing character.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, yes.
I know him mainly from the Defenders.
Okay.
Particularly after this, but
Okay.
But of course, Gerber was a writer of the Defenders. I don't know if he used Son of Satan in those issues, but. But yeah, on into the 80s, Son of Satan was in Defenders a lot.
I think he might, not knowing anything about any of this, I would predict that he might have, because not only did Howard come out of Man-Thing, Omega the Unknown also came out of Man-Thing, and Omega ended in Defenders.
Defenders, yes. Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like Gerber had his own little pocket universe of 3 or 4 Marvel books.
Yeah, well, and
he was trading characters back and forth through.
The Wikipedia entry on Gerber mentions a character called Richard Rory, who apparently appeared in several of Gerber's Marvel series. He's not in this one, but I kind of remember that name from Defenders. Okay. I think I started reading Defenders a little bit before he left.
Okay.
And actually, my brother sent me those issues, and also Omegas. I've got them here on my shelf.
Yeah.
So he had kind of his own pocket universe, and and in a way that makes the appearances of the other Marvel characters a little jarring. You don't quite expect it. I'm like, what's Son of Satan doing here? Oh, that's right. This is a Marvel book.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and yeah, it's weird. It doesn't seem like a Marvel book in a lot of ways, just because it's talking duck walking around. Yeah. But again, I feel like he was again part of that era, that generation of writers, and somehow he was. But I opened the book and I immediately felt, boy, I miss captions, because there were all these captions in every panel. I was like, wow, that's great. I really miss those, and I immediately thought that. I felt like maybe Gerber was, not having read the Max series, which I think would be the true test, but I feel like he was maybe tied down by the strictures of what Marvel was at that time, and he had to write within a certain way, even though he was capable of much, much more than what he was limited by. Because he talks about it again in that Comics Journal interview. He talks about, for example, things like you can only write a certain number of emotions you can only give your characters a certain number of emotions, because the reproduction was so bad that even if the artist drew a perfect face showing guilt or whatever, the reproduction couldn't show that. It could only show a certain range of emotions. So the writer was limited to using those emotions or trying to fix them in the dialogue when he saw how the pages came out.
The other we didn't mention yet, well, the Defenders are in the annual, but the other Marvel characters who show up here are Kiss, which really threw me. Kiss. And
Gerber was had written the Kiss book for Marvel, that giant mega project from also in the 70s. Yeah.
Although it's interesting is that they're never actually named in here. They're the demons who are in Winda's head. And
that's right.
The word "kiss" is used in a couple of cases within that sequence, but it's never like, "Oh, look, it's Kiss."
No, because they're not a band; they're actually demons.
Yeah. But I thought the way I interpreted that, and especially the way that Winda explains it, it seems like she's saying that, like she says, like my parents think that I'm possessed, but actually I'm not. But it's like I felt like I couldn't find the exact page again, but she seemed to be saying like they think that rock and roll is satanic.
Yeah, right. Right.
But these things are in my head, but they're not satanic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my parents just think they are.
Yeah.
What did you make of that character, Winda? Talking like Elmer Fudd.
The Elmer Fudd. See, I had a note about that in here somewhere too, because the Elmer Fudd was okay, but I found by issue 27 it was getting annoying because she had become this permanent character, and it was fine. For a couple of issues, I kind of could accept it, and then she was not on stage so much, and then she came back at the end, and it was just a little bit too much. He could have toned down the lisp.
But I was surprised to find that Bev disappears for those issues after she gets Dr. Bond. I was thinking that they were always together throughout the series. Oh, what I think I wanted to mention before was that Wikipedia notes that Gerber was basically just pulled off of all of his books.
That's right.
When he started complaining about creator issues.
Well, okay, what happened was Gerber was on the newspaper strip, which he really loved doing, even though it was more limited than the comic. But at some stage, Marvel decided that Gerber was not the guy to write the newspaper strip. Maybe because he was pushing the envelope a little bit too far, even though it was quite tame. And Marvel fired him. And that pissed Gerber off. So Gerber decided to sue Marvel. And Marvel then fired him from Howard the Duck.
And everything else that he was writing, I guess.
Yeah, and basically everything else. But, the key one was Howard was his baby, basically.
Yeah.
And that's how he ended up being fired.
Yeah, so he left in 1979. Yeah, just a few issues into when I started reading Defenders.
Right.
Okay. But I think that's why we don't get a resolution of that. I don't know how the next writer handled it. Yeah,
I don't know, and I think Gerber might have tried to write out some of that stuff or something. Because the weird thing is, even though he sued Marvel, eventually he came back and he was reusing Howard. And I think he used her in Sensational She-Hulk or something. A couple of issues
Wikipedia mentions that.
And eventually he actually stole Howard the Duck using a clone called Leonard the Duck.
Right,
We had some crossover with Savage Dragon or something, and he managed to steal Howard the Duck from Marvel. So Marvel now just has a copy, a hollow shell, and Steve Gerber has the real Howard the Duck, who's now called Leonard the Duck, I believe.
Yeah, exactly.
He's going by false name. Yeah, there's all sorts of weird legal stuff going on. I don't know. I don't understand Gerber's relationship with Marvel, because then he came back and he wrote the Max series.
Yeah.
And there's also a series going now. There's one that just came out, which is not a Max series.
Written by who?
Past year. I can't remember. Somebody else.
Because Gerber died a few months ago.
He died in February, I believe, which was the reason I chose this book in February. I think it's when I first recommended it, because I thought, well, Gerber's dead. Let's do Howard the Duck.
Yeah.
Or I thought, and then a few weeks later, Jim Mooney died, and I thought, we should do Omega the Unknown.
Yeah, actually, my brother and I have been talking about doing that, and he had pointed out they both died during the new Omega series.
That's right. Yeah. Anyway, how did we end up on all this legal stuff? Well, they got sued by Disney as well, because he was not wearing pants, so he had to start wearing pants at some stage, so that he would not be a likeness of Donald the Duck, I guess.
Yeah,
Donald Duck, not Donald the Duck.
Donald the
anyway.
Duck. Well, hey, that "the" is enough to differentiate. Hey,
yeah, you think so? You think so? Anyway, I don't know how we ended up on that. Another weird thing is that Gerber was editing the book.
Well, yeah, I noticed that, and I recalled that. Wikipedia seems to think that was rare, but my understanding is that at that point in Marvel, it was sort of semi-usual to have writer-editors.
Really?
Well, I mean, I know that Len Wein was doing it on Spider-Man about the same
Oh,
time. And
he was editing and writing?
Yeah, and I remember later, like maybe about 10 years ago, I was reading some of those issues, and they're huge, like, story holes in them because nobody's kind of, when you're editing
nobody's
yourself,
policed him.
There's nobody to catch the mistakes.
Right.
Like, how did Spidey get from over there to over here?
Right.
There's no explanation.
Right. Was he the first writer after Stan Lee?
No, I think there were others in between there.
So how long did Stan Lee write Spider-Man?
Well, let's see.
Was it up into the hundreds?
I don't know that he got to 100. I think.
Okay.
Now, was Jerry Conway? He was artist, wasn't he? I'm trying.
No, he was a writer.
I think he was writing it when Gwen Stacy died, which I think is early 100s.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure when Stan left, but around 1970 or so, I think.
Okay. Well, that would 70. That would be you could do a calculation at 12 issues a year for 6 years. That would be 72 issues. About. So he would have. Let's arbitrarily say he did about 75 issues.
Okay.
And then a string of other writers came on after him, like Jerry Conway and Len Wein and probably Roy Thomas and probably Steve Gerber and the other House writers.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how many other writer-editors there were, but
right.
But in the case of Steve Gerber, I didn't catch, other than a couple of misspellings, and that might have been the letterer's fault. Otherwise, I didn't catch any particular problems.
The balloon placement was weak.
Yeah, I had that
a lot of the time.
Now, who decides that? Is that the letterer, or would the editor
sure
say no, don't put it there?
In those days it was paste up lettering, so I'm sure the editor could say this is in the wrong place. You need to redo.
Because I had a lot of problems with figuring out what the sequence of balloons or
narration
narration
a lot of
boxes
times.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was maybe the weakest part of the whole thing for me, because I'm not sure where we're going.
Yeah. You got to read them a couple of times until you figure out which one goes first. Yeah. That was. I do think the editor, because those Marvel and DC books are micromanaged. I mean, there's no stage at which the editor isn't able to change something. So I can't believe that they would have turned in the pages and he would have had no control over it.
Yeah.
Anyway, now what about the art? Because we've been talking about Steve Gerber, and we haven't talked about the art at all.
Well, in most cases, I thought it was pretty good. I don't know. I didn't have much to say about the art.
Well, to me the art was there were dramatic things to say about it in a sense because Colan was such a realistic artist for that era, and he was kind of unlike a lot of those guys that were. I mean, Marvel had a Real House style at the time in the 70s. I mean, I looked through those 70s books and I feel like they all look the same. Well, it's true in the 80s and the 90s and the noughts as well. But it was like in the 60s.
So,
in the 60s, there was Jack Kirby and there was nothing like it, and there was Steve Ditko and there was nothing like it. You know what I mean? It was like, they were so distinct. And suddenly in the 70s, you just have everybody looks like a combination of Kirby and Ditko. And they're all they're all those guys that grew up reading those comics in the 60s and now we're drawing them in almost the same way, in a sense. DC had their own house style too, but for me, Colan kind of stood out because he had such realism. And I was wondering how does that fit in with this walking, talking duck? That was kind of I don't know. It was kind of oddly jarring at first, and then later on, I felt like it couldn't have been any other way. Like it had to be drawn as realistically as possible, almost. I
was just looking at, just noticing the the Marvel Treasury edition number 12 that has the Defender story.
Yeah.
Drawn by Sal Buscema, whose art I never
Oh, yeah.
particularly liked.
Yeah.
And
well,
the figures seem
he was okay on
kind of
Conan,
stiffer.
you know.
Well, I guess.
And that's kind of it, you know.
But yeah, I mean, art-wise, I guess that's my least favorite in here. But
Yeah. Well, he was, he was great at cheating in backgrounds. I think Buscema. He really would just color the background pink and leave it. Although often, I mean, he did the second Superman Spider-Man team up, but he only did the characters. Somebody else at Marvel had done the backgrounds. I can't remember who it was. But that's the only way that book could work, because otherwise there would be no backgrounds. You know, the book, because he seemed to cheat on those a lot. Myerick, I thought was a real problem next to Colin, because his artwork just seemed to get worse and worse with each fill-in issue that he did, because he did a few here and there, and
he's the artist who created Howard, right?
Yeah, that's right, and yet he seems to have the wrong take on Howard compared to Colin, because it's just seemed rough and cartoony, and it just got uglier, and it just seemed wrong compared to
yeah, he draws that annual.
Yeah, that's right. He did the annual, and
there's a blurb there like, "Hey, it's the original artist of Howard the Duck. He's back."
Yeah, and it was just it was his work was much lusher and looked better in those first Howard the Duck appearances, and just later as you get on, it seems to get worse. Whereas Colin, it was interesting because he there's a couple of issues where Howard becomes human, and he has his mannerisms down beautifully. He's able to draw all the hand gestures and the facial expressions in a way that were just perfect. And there were a couple of issues that had kind of supernatural kind of things, and it seems like Gerber was writing very specifically to Colin's strengths at that stage.
When Howard became a human, who did you think he was supposed to look like? I had the sense that he was modeled on someone.
I vaguely felt he was modeled on Peter Falk.
Yeah, that was one of the people who went through my mind. The other one was one of the Marx brothers.
Yeah.
His name is escaping me now. Chico.
I don't think there's a Chico. There's Groucho, and there's
Harpo
and maybe it was Harpo that you're thinking of.
No, I think. Well, no, I'm thinking.
Isn't there a
Chico.
Schlepp?
That's Three Stooges.
Okay.
I'm thinking of Three Stooges now. Anyway, but yeah, I think maybe Peter Falk is who they were going for.
Yeah.
It would make sense since he was a big star in the 70s.
Right. What about Jansen's inking? Because he becomes a regular inker. What did you think of?
I guess I wasn't picking up as much of his kind of signature style as in his later work. He seems to be just kind of getting started, maybe.
Yeah, it seemed very tight and clean, especially earlier on. He loosens up a little bit later, but Mulele says says that Jansen looks like he's inking with his tongue. Which
or other kind of body part.
Or other, which is true of his later stuff, especially so loose and rough. It's almost like Sienkiewicz kind of, like multiple lines instead of one. Yeah, but it's interesting reading the book in black and white because you can really see the different qualities of the various inkers. And what's his name? Tom Palmer did one issue, and man, he was so good. And unfortunately, he only did the one issue.
Number 24.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. But wow, he was so good. I think there was I might be totally talking out of my ass on this one, but I think there was an interview with Alex Robinson on the Comics Journal site, and he had, I can't remember which cartooning school he went to, but he might have been the Joe Kubert school or something, very briefly, and Colin was one of his teachers, and he didn't like his art, and Colin was like, I want to do something like Love and Rockets, and Colin had never heard of it. And he's like, what's this thing? And he's like, oh, it only sells a few thousand. And Colin was scratching he just couldn't wrap his head around it. Like, why would anyone want to do this? Kind of thing. So that's kind of, back when I made that insult about Colin at the beginning of the show, that was kind of, that was in reference to his one strength being his line work. Yeah. But I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Tom Palmer issue. Yeah, now that I look at it, I can really kind of recognize it's his style.
Yeah. Yeah. And Infantino does one fill-in issue on pencils, and he's not quite a good fit for Howard the Duck, I think. But anyway.
We haven't talked about issue 16, where he
right.
writes an essay to fill in for late art.
Yeah. Yeah, wow, that was interesting. Right, so basically, Gerber's too busy to write an issue.
Was that it, or was it the art wasn't done?
No, I think Gerber was actually he was working on the strip and a bunch in the Kiss.
Yeah, and he mentions the annual and.
He's working on the annual and the strip and Kiss, and he's just plays too full. He can't write an issue, so he basically writes a 20-page essay, which is illustrated. Each page or 2-page spread is illustrated by a different bullpen artist, basically.
And it's kind of about being a writer,
right? Yes. So,
but I'm not sure what else to say about it.
Well, I wanted to say that I don't know if it's good or bad or whatever. It exists. It simply exists. It's issue 16 of Howard the Duck. It's this weird fill-in issue where the interesting thing about this is that a fill-in issue exists. Okay, they had to get an issue of Howard the Duck to the newsstands, so they couldn't actually be late. This is pre-direct market, because it seems so interesting to me that this could not happen now.
Yeah, that's true. Now they would just delay it.
They would just delay for a month or 2 months or even a year or 2 years, as is happening with a couple of books right now.
Yeah, well, like when Straczynski got busy with something else on Spider-Man, they didn't put out an issue of Amazing Spider-Man for months, and it was right when the first movie came out, too.
Yeah.
It seemed unthinkable, but...
Yeah. I know. You can't even imagine. But in this era, when you were responsible to your distributors and you had to produce a monthly issue to generate revenue, there was just no way they could not have an issue on the stands. And he says they were even thinking about doing a reprint issue. Like they would have reprinted the guts. They would have reprinted the guts of a previous issue of Howard the Duck and put a new number on it, just to get the product on the stands. To me, it's completely, wow, this is only 30 years ago that it was so radically different.
I know in those days, in Marvel generally, they had some extra stories in the can to use as fill-in in case they needed to. But I guess they didn't have one for Howard.
No, because it was ongoing too. They couldn't really do fill-in.
Well, sometimes they did anyway.
That's true.
And there'd just be a little note that says, this issue happens before the events of blah blah blah.
Yeah, I was reading that issue 16. I really wondered if maybe they should be doing it now anyway. Like even though we have this trade paperback writing for the trade situation, maybe it would be worthwhile if your book is going to be, 8-9 months late. Maybe have some fill-in stuff. Maybe have your writer have some essays or, put in some. Well, I'm going to make the suggestion. I'm going to immediately deflate it, but maybe you should reprint some stuff from like the classic issues of the series. But the reason I'm going to deflate that is because every time I see, sometimes they do like, sometimes they put out specials and there's a backup feature of like, some story reprinted from the 1950s, and I'm always like, oh, that story's so much better than the new stuff, and it always makes me feel worse about the book. So maybe that's not such a good idea, but at least you would have something on the shelf, for those interim 2 years or whatever.
The other problem, though, today with having filler issues in the can would be like, at least with Marvel, it's, constant cycle of events, and
yes,
the Civil
Good
War
point.
miniseries was late because the artist couldn't get it done fast enough, and there's no way you could put out a filler or a reprint of that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you definitely, you can't with a miniseries for sure. Yeah, the event thing is a major issue. Because I think it's actually delayed. I think all of DC's books are delayed because their Final Crisis was delayed or something. Like it pushed every book.
Well, that happened with Civil War at Marvel. Yeah, other books were getting delayed because Civil War was delayed. That's right.
Yeah, wow. Brutal.
Yeah, and that would have been unthinkable in the 70s.
Yeah.
They weren't doing events like that in the 70s. They couldn't have gotten away with it in terms of the distribution,
No, that's right. It's only in the, once the direct market came up, because immediately, I mean, the two famous ones are Camelot 3000, which issue 12 was delayed something like a year, 2 years, and Watchmen number 12 was like a year late.
Oh, wow.
They kind of had those liberties, because imagine if, you had to do 11 fill-in issues of Watchmen, written by Roy Thomas and illustrated by Sal Buscema until issue 12 was ready, or something. Yeah, madness, complete madness. I thought it was really creative. I love that Gerber had this creative solution, to get out of his mind, and we don't have those solutions now, and even if we did, we couldn't really use them.
Yeah. Oh, another thing I wanted to talk about. Howard's kind of state of mind. We have several issues where he's like kind of, internally things are going on. He's hearing voices and he's hallucinating, and I never felt like we got enough kind of resolution of that. But he just seemed to be kind of fighting within himself and not just with the world, but he was internally screwed up.
I found it was weird that he got into that state in the first place. I thought it was he just kind of shifted into this kind of almost semi-madness, and it wasn't really explained. I guess it's all in the captions, and maybe, I wasn't paying enough. As much as I said I loved reading captions, maybe I wasn't paying enough attention. Because, he does seem to slip out and slip in and slip out without much ado.
Well, I saw somewhere, I don't know if it was in the issue 16 or something I saw on the net when I was looking around yesterday, but Gerber didn't really plan ahead very much. He just kind of, what came to mind was what came out on the paper.
Right.
And he didn't have like an overarching story in mind for 12 issues or something.
Right.
So, maybe we get kind of that... that's what accounts for sort of the meandering a little bit. Yeah. All very odd. And unfortunately, again, a problem with the Essentials presentation is it's cut off at issue 27 with the story incomplete and Gerber fired. Yeah. There's enough material for a volume 2, definitely maybe in volume 3, because there's the newspaper strip. And there's the continuation of the series, which is probably not very good, but which I haven't read, so I can't speak about. And the Max Mini, which of course they couldn't put in the Essential because it was Max rated. And there's the new series as well. The black and white magazine. I don't know if. Obviously there was stuff in there that wasn't Comics Code worthy, but I don't know if it went as far as the Max series did. I know there was some nudity in it.
Okay. Even if they reprinted that, Dracula, the Essential Dracula was censored. They've covered up the breasts with bras and bikinis. So I'm sure they would do the very same thing with Howard the Duck if they were to reprint the magazine series.
Yeah, the Max series was pretty hardcore.
Right.
In some places.
Right.
With the nudity and whatever.
Right. Okay.
The last issue of the Max series stands out in my mind, though, because it had really nothing to do with the rest of the story. It was entirely kind of Gerber's deconstruction of Christianity. and kind of poking holes in it, and it was. I found it pretty interesting.
That's interesting because I was thinking, often reading this, especially in the early issues, that Howard the Duck as a series was pretty similar to Cerebus, in some of the way, in kind of the humor, and even the Howard's physical resemblance to Cerebus. And it's interesting you should mention the final issue, Deconstructing Christianity, because Dave Sim takes apart the Bible almost line by line for like 2 volumes of Cerebus right towards the end. So they might have been thinking in a similar kind of way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anyway.
Well, we're getting close to an hour here now.
Okay. I want to hear from your opinion on Marvel in the 70s, because I know you didn't read DC in the 70s, but I just want to hear your
Marvel in the 70s in
because
general.
you grew up reading Marvel in the 70s, right? And I didn't.
Yeah, well, I guess my brother and I really started to buy Marvel comics about 78.
Okay. Late 70s. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I've read some earlier ones, later on.
Yeah.
My recollection of Marvel stuff that I've read from the 70s. Of course, printing quality is horrible.
Yep.
Colors are horrible.
Yep.
Art. I think most of the art is, in my recollection, not very good.
Okay.
I think a lot of the best artists of today are quite a bit better than most of the ones that Marvel had then.
But they had what? I mean, they had Barry Windsor Smith on Conan at least, and didn't they have Gil Kane there for a while?
Yeah.
And they had Romita Sr., although I guess he was kind of out of there by... I mean, he wasn't working on Spider-Man regularly.
I don't know if he ever did anything regularly besides Spider-Man, and he was gone around the same time that Stan Lee left that book.
Mm-hmm. And recently I've been kind of, Ross Andrew, I've been kind of... I think he was very ordinary, but he was kind of good at what he did. He was good at his ordinariness, I think, recently I've been feeling. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I'd have to go back and look at some of that stuff, but I would go into it with some trepidation. I'm just not sure that I would that I would like any of it very well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just trying to, because I haven't read a lot of it, because again, probably like you, I read a couple of issues of it, and it's bad.
Yeah, like we were saying, it's just kind of regurgitated Stan Lee.
Yeah, without the kind of arrogance of Stan Lee.
Or the humor in a lot of cases.
Yeah, because I was always a DC guy, and I kind of grew up at the. I was into Superman. Guess early '80s was when I kind of started picking up comics in the junk shops. And looking at them now, those were pretty awful comics. Although I liked them as a kid. But Superman in the '50s and '60s was great because they weren't trying to be Marvel. And even Batman was good in the '60s when it was that kind of Adam Westy kind of stuff. And then they tried to go all Marvel in the '70s, and to me that was just, And yet at the same time they were, Marvel, they were having great sales, but I don't think those books were very good either. Howard the Duck might have been one of the few good things to come out of, writing wise. Not talking about the art, because I think there's a lot of good art, especially at Marvel.
Just not reproduced well enough. Maybe that's right. That was what kind of colors my recollection of the art, because the way it looks, the current comics are printed so much better.
Yeah,
you can appreciate the art more.
Yeah. Well, the best of times, the worst of times.
Yeah.
Maybe we should end on that sad note.
But I mean, I guess one other thing I would add to that is
okay.
that the artists now are kind of building on what the artists then did, and
yes.
of course, Kirby and Ditko are revered now,
yes.
and much imitated, and
yes.
in some ways maybe improved upon, just as the Beatles have been, or other pioneers are, in whatever field.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know in terms of Howard the Duck. Howard's kind of in a class by himself, I think.
Yes, I agree.
Especially within mainstream comics.
Yeah. yeah. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure we've done some mangling of Marvel history in this episode, so if you spotted any errors or have any comments about our discussion, feel free to post it on our blog. You no longer need to register to post a comment at deconstructingcomics.com, so what are you waiting for? Email is also fine, mail@deconstructingcomics.com. You can even send us a voicemail. Just record an MP3 file of your message and email it to us. But please keep voice messages to 30 seconds. We also have a Facebook page, and I'm asking our members there to make suggestions for the program. So if you're on Facebook, please join our group and send us a message. And if you'd like to send us a donation, use the PayPal link at deconstructingcomics.com. Deconstructing Comics is brought to you by comicsnow.com. You can subscribe to all your favorite series from Comics Now and get 35% off the cover price, and off of any other books you order. Comics Now provides many of the comics we review on this show. Read Eric's newsletter on our site, deconstructingcomics.com, to see this month's pick, which will be 50% off to Comics Now subscribers. Next week I'm planning to talk with Mulele, kind of a meta episode. What's the state of this podcast after 3 years, and where do we go from here? Of course, Mulele will also update us on his career, including his ongoing interaction with the big Japanese publisher Kodansha. Till then, thanks for listening. This is Tim. See you next week on Deconstructing Comics.